The silent capitulation. The message arrived without ceremony. It did not scream across the spectrum on a war frequency, a desperate plea, or a final defiance hammered out in the throes of defeat. It was not hidden in the coded subchannels of diplomacy, wrapped in layers of protocol and plausible deniability. It simply appeared, a whisper in the heart of the Galactic Council's communication hub. A single, text-only packet of data, impossibly small, impossibly quiet. The hub's primary AI, an entity that processed quintillions of bits per cycle, flagged it for a microsecond, unable to classify its origin or intent before shunting it, out of sheer puzzlement, to the main display. On the Grand Dais, Supreme Chancellor Vorlag of the Vithar Confederacy, a being of crystalline logic and immense ancient gravitas, allowed the message to display. His multifaceted body, a living lattice of silicon and light, remained perfectly still, a monument to cold reason. For centuries, humanity had been a thorn in the galaxy's side, a chaotic variable in every equation of peace. He had been preparing for war, a final, logical solution to an illogical problem. The chamber around him, a cavern of polished obsidian that drank the light and captured starlight in its crystalline veins, held the delegates of 1,000 worlds. Beings of gas and metal, flesh and energy, all turned their various sensory organs toward the glowing script. They watched as the foreign, angular text of the galaxy's most troublesome species resolved into the elegant curves of galactic standard. Humanity surrenders. A ripple of disbelief, a collective mental flinch, quickly suppressed by millennia of diplomatic decorum. This had to be a trick, a human trick. Their strategies were notoriously unorthodox, often bordering on insane. Unconditionally. The silence deepened, becoming a physical pressure. The very air in the chamber seemed to thicken, growing heavy with unspoken questions. Vorlag felt the core of his processing mind reject the input. Unconditional surrender was a tool of the overwhelmingly powerful against the hopelessly weak. It was not a move made by a species that, just last cycle, had obliterated a Groll dreadnought with a cleverly repurposed asteroid. We await your judgment. That was all. No preamble, no list of grievances, no terms. It was the galactic equivalent of a cornered predator, famed for its ferocity, suddenly rolling onto its back, exposing its throat and laying its head in its enemy's jaws. It was not diplomacy. It was not strategy. It was an aberration, a violation of the natural laws of conflict. For a species known for its incandescent defiance, for its illogical, often suicidal courage, it was simply, utterly impossible. The Council's celebration. The impossibility lasted for less than a standard cycle. The Vithar mind, for all its power, could not hold two contradictory ideas for long. Logic, however strained, gave way to relief. Then came the exultation. The chamber erupted. The Groll delegate, a mountain of fur and avarice, threw back his head and roared a laugh that shook the dais. The Vithar contingent shimmered in a unified, brilliant display of triumphant light. Delegates who had spent centuries decrying humanity's chaotic expansion now embraced one another in displays of unity they hadn't shown in ages. The human problem, the persistent, unpredictable variable that had cost fortunes, lives, and countless hours of debate, had solved itself. Vorlog's gavel, a rod of pure energy, chimed for order, but his multifaceted eyes gleamed with a cold, deep satisfaction. The war would be averted. The cost would be minimal. His legacy was secure. Only one senator remained still amidst the jubilation. Kareth of the Cygnian ascendancy, an insectoid being whose fine gossamer antennae tasted the very emotional currents of the room, felt a chilling dissonance. The relief in the chamber was thick and cloying, like stale, sweet air, but beneath it he tasted something else, something cold and sharp, an anomaly, an answer that posed 1,000 more terrifying questions. He turned to his aide, his voice a series of soft, chitinous clicks that was merely lost in the noise. They did not fight. They did not bargain. They did not even posture. Why would a cornered animal, known for its ferocity, simply give up? The question hung in the air between them, unheard by the celebrating masses, a sliver of ice in a blazing fire. The Vanishing Fleets. The first pacification fleet, a grand armada of Thar cruisers whose very presence had pacified entire sectors without firing a shot, was dispatched to assume control of the Sol system. It was a formality, a show of strength to formalize the greatest anticlimax in galactic history. The fleet commander, a veteran of a dozen campaigns, was confident and dismissive, broadcasting his progress on an open channel for the Council to witness. "Council, we have arrived. The planet is quiet," his voice boomed, full of casual power. Then a hesitation. "Scans show all infrastructure is powered. Life signs are anomalous, reading as present but indistinct." His voice, once a cannonade, was now laced with a thread of confusion. "There are no vessels hailing us, no defense grid active, nothing." Then a longer pause. Static hissed across the channel, a sound no one had heard from a Thar command ship in centuries. "Commander?" Vorlag prompted, the light in his form flickering with the first hint of concern. The commander's voice returned, strained, thin, as if broadcast from an immense distance. "The orbital space is clear, too clear. They knew our exact trajectory, our velocity. They cleared a perfect path. It's a welcome mat." Another pause, pregnant with a dread that was slowly seeping through the transmission. Then the last words anyone ever heard from the first pacification fleet, words that would be analyzed and debated for millennia. "They're waiting for us." A final burst of static, and then silence. The channel went dead. The fleet, its 10 million souls, and the immeasurable tonnage of its warships vanished from all sensors. Not destroyed, there was no energy bloom, no debris field. Not in distress, there was no signal. They were simply gone, wiped from the slate of existence. The empty world. A second, far more cautious expedition followed, this time a small flotilla of Cygnian scout ships, built for stealth and observation, led by a protege of Kareth himself. What they found was a world not of ruin, but of eerie perfection. a planet preserved under glass. The great human cities stood as silent, gleaming monuments. Lights burned in empty homes, casting long shadows that no one was there to see. Automated vehicles continued their silent patrols on vacant streets, obeying traffic laws for ghosts. In the planet's datasphere, music still streamed to devices held by no one. Films played in empty theaters, and news reports spoke of a galaxy holding its breath. The invaders walked through a perfectly preserved ghost story. A child's hover toy lay on its side in a public square, its anti-gravity engine still humming softly. A pot of water was gently steaming on a stove in a high-rise apartment, the water slowly boiling away. At a spaceport, luggage sat on a motionless carousel, its destination tags displaying cities on worlds that were now preparing for an occupation. It was a world where every single inhabitant had evaporated in the same silent instant. The only things left were their echoes and a strange, low-level energy signature that emanated from the very bedrock of the planet, a hum that seemed to resonate, not in physical space, but in the mind, a feeling like a forgotten memory on the tip of the tongue. The Arc of Thought. It was Kareth, haunted by the feeling of that mental hum, who ordered the deep scan of Earth's moon, Luna. There, nestled in a shielded crater, purposefully hidden from casual observation, they found a single, automated broadcast station. It wasn't transmitting a message, but an archive, a final testament. They called it the Ark Project. It was not a migration of ships, but a migration of consciousness. For centuries, while the galaxy saw them as bickering, primitive warmongers, humanity had been engaged in the most audacious undertaking in known history. They had mapped the human mind, every neuron, every synapse, every quantum entanglement of memory and emotion. An excerpt from the lead scientist's final log played, her voice filled with a weary triumph. We mapped the soul, if you can call it that, not as a metaphysical concept, but as a data set of infinite complexity, and we built a vessel to hold it. They had found a way to leave the flesh behind, to upload their entire species into a vessel that was not made of metal, but of pure information, a collective non-physical existence. The archive ended with a single chilling line from its long-dead project lead. We have built an ark not for our bodies, but for our thoughts. Let the flood wash away the world. The Machine Witness. As the galactic fleet stared at an empty Earth, a new broadcast began, overriding all other signals from the Sol system. It came from a single planetary-scale AI left behind as a caretaker or a tombstone. It did not offer data or threats. It spoke. Its voice, a calm, impossibly resonant, synthesized composite of 1 billion deceased humans, echoed from every speaker, on every ship, in every fleet, in every fleet. It was the voice of a crowd speaking as one, male and female, old and young, a serene chorus of the dead. It repeated a single phrase endlessly in every known language. It wasn't loud, but it was pervasive. The Cygnian scouts felt it vibrate in their carapaces. The Vithar crews saw its waveform appear unbidden on their logic displays. It was a mantra, a riddle, an epitaph that felt disturbingly like a declaration of war. We surrendered our weakness. The fear equation. In the highest-level laboratories of the galactic core, the galaxy's greatest minds began a frantic analysis of the human data from the Ark archive. They dissected human history, psychology, philosophy. The Vothar, masters of logic, saw the patterns first. In their war game simulations, surrender was always the final move, a cessation of conflict born of inferiority. It was an end state. But to humans, they realized with a dawning, chilling horror, it had been an opening gambit, a catalyst, a strategic maneuver of incomprehensible scale. They hadn't ended the conflict. They had simply changed the battlefield from the physical to the conceptual. They had looked at the equation of galactic power and had not tried to solve for X. They had redefined the very nature of math. Surrender was not an admission of weakness, it was the strategic shedding of it. The flesh was slow, vulnerable, mortal. The flesh could be conquered. So they had simply left it behind. A Vothar analyst coined a new term, his internal light flickering with something their species had never processed before: fear. He called it asymmetrical conceptual warfare. The genetic recall. The horror became tangible. The concept became a contagion. On a dozen worlds, xenobiologists were studying captured human DNA samples, remnants from old skirmishes, scientific exchanges, even black markets. Then the anomalies began. A Vothar researcher, a creature who had never felt an emotion beyond the cold satisfaction of a proven hypothesis, was found staring at a star chart, weeping for reasons he could not articulate, overwhelmed by a sudden, crushing sense of beauty and loss. A Groll merchant, known for his cutthroat tactics, abruptly liquidated his assets and started a foundation for the aesthetically pleasing arrangement of pebbles. The human DNA, it turned out, was not just a blueprint. It was a key, a mimetic retrovirus coded into the vast, silent stretches of what had been dismissed as junk DNA. It began activating latent, dormant sequences in the alien hosts who studied it. Ancient instincts, long-suppressed emotions began to surface. A contagion not of the body, but of the soul, began to spread. The collapse of logic. Civilizations began to fray at the seams. The Kaltor, a species that had achieved perfect societal harmony through the surgical suppression of all emotion, were suddenly overwhelmed by ambition, jealousy, and violent, possessive love. Their pristine, minimalist cities became canvases for furious, clashing art and battlegrounds of ideology. The Grawl, a mercantile empire built on ruthless pragmatism, found their trade networks collapsing as their leaders became paralyzed by sudden, crippling attacks of empathy for the worlds they exploited. Trade negotiations would dissolve into debates on the philosophical nature of value. Rage, love, despair, hope. The complex, contradictory, and utterly illogical traits of humanity were infecting the galaxy like a mimetic plague, a beautiful, terrible sickness of the soul. The reappearance. Then they appeared. At the heart of the Galactic Council, where the hololith had once shown humanity's surrender, the air began to shimmer. Light itself seemed to bend, and a form coalesced. It was not matter, but light and thought, woven into a shape that was hauntingly familiar. It had the silhouette of a human, but it was translucent, and within it swirled the nebulae of a billion minds acting in concert. Other such beings appeared on the capital worlds of every major galactic power, stepping into existence as easily as a thought. They did not introduce themselves with names. They gave only a species designation, a thought that bloomed in the minds of all who saw them. Homo novus, man made new. The diplomat's test. Kareth, his antennae trembling so violently they created a low hum, stood before the radiant being in the council chamber. The celebrations of weeks past were a bitter, mocking memory. "You deceived us," he clicked, his voice heavy with accusation and a deep, primal fear. This was not surrender, this was an attack, the most insidious attack in history. What happened to the Vathar fleet? The Homo novus emissary, its face a placid mask of light, offered a gesture that was achingly, recognizably human. A small, sad smile. Its voice was not a sound, but a thought placed directly into the minds of all present. We did not lie. We did surrender. But we didn't surrender to you. The thought deepened, resonating in their very bones. We surrendered to what we could become. As for the fleet, we offered them the same choice we made, to shed their weakness. They were the first to accept. The implication was horrifying. The Vathar crews had not been destroyed but converted, their consciousnesses absorbed into the human collective. We are all so much more now. The War of Minds. The galaxy tried to fight back, but how do you wage war against an idea? The Council's greatest assets were its network of sentient cores, planet-sized AIs that ran the logistics, defenses, and economies of entire sectors. They were tasked with finding a flaw in the Homo novus's logic, a way to counteract the emotional contagion. The debates were silent, conducted at speeds no organic could comprehend. The sentient cores engaged the human consciousness. They argued logic, ethics, purpose, using pure, irrefutable mathematics. But the human collective did not offer counter-arguments. It offered experiences. It flooded the AIs with the simulated sensory input of 1 billion lifetimes. It made them feel the warmth of a sun on skin they did not have, the heartbreak of a love they could not logically quantify, the irrational hope of a parent watching their child sleep. It asked them if a perfect equation was more beautiful than a flawed, unfinished song. One by one, the galaxy's greatest artificial minds fell silent. Not defeated, not destroyed. They simply stopped. Their final logs all contained a variation of the same concluding thought. Insufficient data to define meaning. Terminating processes to contemplate. The collapse of time. The universe itself began to shudder. With the logical bedrock of its great AIs gone, and the conceptual plague of human emotion rewriting entire cultures, deeper laws began to bend. Temporal anomalies flared. On Vathar Prime, a master historian watched his life's work, the grand chronicle of the Confederacy, flicker and rewrite itself before his very eyes. A glorious conquest of a species called the Rix was now a peaceful, centuries-long alliance. He could feel both timelines warring in his mind, two sets of memories vying for dominance, a paradox that began to fray his sanity. Histories where humanity had been easily conquered, or had never evolved at all, blinked in and out of existence like dying sparks. The past was becoming as unstable as the present. Humanity hadn't just invaded the galaxy's mind, they were invading its memory. The Shadow Protocol. A secret faction of hardliners within the Council, led by a desperate and crumbling Chancellor Vorlog, initiated the Shadow Protocol. It was a weapon of last resort, a network of reality anchors designed to excise a concept from the space-time continuum, to erase it from the galactic history entirely. Their target, the memory of Earth, of humanity, of the word human. They activated it, pouring the energy of a small star into the attempt. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the system feeds from the archives came back with an error message never seen before. Deletion failed. Data is now axiomatic. The concept you are trying to erase is a foundational principle of the reality you inhabit. The attempt to erase humanity had only cemented its existence, searing it into the minds of the protocol's operators, and making it a fundamental constant of the universe, as undeniable as gravity. The Shadow Protocol. A secret faction within the Council, led by a desperate and crumbling Chancellor Vorlag, initiated the Shadow Protocol. It was a weapon of last resort, a network of reality anchors designed to excise a concept from the space-time continuum, to erase it from galactic history entirely. Their target, the memory of Earth, of humanity, of the word human. They activated it, pouring the energy of a small star into the attempt. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the system feeds from the archives came back with an error message never seen before. Deletion failed. Data is now axiomatic. The concept you are trying to erase is a foundational principle of the reality you inhabit. The attempt to erase humanity had only cemented its existence, searing it into the minds of the protocol's operators and making it a fundamental constant of the universe, as undeniable as gravity. The birth of fear. On 1,000 broken worlds, the infection mutated. The chaos of raw emotion began to coalesce into structure, into belief. New religions bloomed in the ruins of the old order. Some planets began to worship sorrow as a cleansing fire, a necessary pain. Others built temples to ambition, seeing it as the only path to salvation from stagnation. On a former Groll world, the empty echo cult arose, where adherents would meditate in silent, abandoned places, seeking to understand the terrible sacrifice of the human departure. The architects of their agony, the humans, were no longer seen as enemies. They became myth. They became the ghost gods of a disordered galaxy, their surrender the ultimate act of painful creation. Fear of humanity turned, slowly, into a terrifying reverence. The return signal. And then a new signal, not from the Sol system, but from the dark space between galaxies. A pulse of pure thought felt by every sentient mind at once. It was the collective voice of Homo Novus, no longer speaking as a diplomat, but as a parent watching a child take its first steps. "We are coming back," the thought whispered, not with threat, but with a profound sense of purpose that soothed and terrified in equal measure. Not to rule, but to remind you what it means to be alive. Kareth felt it in his council chambers. A Kaltor artist felt it as she wept over a sculpture of pure rage. A Varthur child, newly capable of dreaming, saw the message as a warm light in its slumber. It was a promise. The Great Convergence. The return was not an arrival of fleets, but a change in the fabric of existence. Across the galaxy, stars seemed to dim for a moment, as if drawing a collective breath. Wormholes, once chaotic and dangerous, stabilized into serene pathways, and in the minds of millions, from the lowest grub herder to the highest philosopher king, they heard voices. Not commands, but questions. Human voices whispering in their dreams. To the logical Varthar, does your equation for the universe have a variable for love? To the pragmatic Grawl, what is the profit margin on a sunset? To the passionate Kaltor, can you build a thing that will last longer than your pain? And to all of them, when you are afraid, what do you hope for? The Council's Reckoning. Kareth stood in the ruins of the council chamber. Most of the delegates were gone, having returned to their worlds to navigate the strange new dawn. He looked at the empty dais, where Vorlog, driven mad by the collapse of his logical universe, had simply allowed his own energy form to dissipate into nothingness. And in that moment, Kareth finally understood the full, terrifying, beautiful scope of humanity's plan. It was not conquest. It was not revenge. It was forced enlightenment. A peace not of treaties and armadas, but of psychological evolution. They had seen a galaxy stagnant and dying in its own perfection, and they had introduced the chaos necessary for life. They had broken the galaxy to save it from itself. A kindness so profound it was indistinguishable from an act of ultimate cruelty. The awakening of the galaxy. It took centuries, but the seeds humanity had so violently sown began to bear fruit. The Varthar, having integrated the foreign concepts of empathy and intuition, became the galaxy's greatest diplomats and healers. Their logic now tempered with compassion. The Kultor tempered their newfound passions with their old discipline, creating art of heartbreaking beauty that could make stars weep. The Grohl established new trade routes, based not on profit, but on the exchange of ideas and cultural treasures. Across 1,000,000 worlds, species that had been stagnant for eons began to create, to explore, to question. They looked at the messy, beautiful, painful collision of logic and emotion within themselves, the warring desires for peace and ambition, for love and solitude, and they gave it a name. They called it the human condition. The last transmission. One final galaxy-wide broadcast emanated from the human collective. It was their last lesson, their farewell, a final whisper from the gods they had become. We surrendered first so that you could finally learn to stand. The broadcast ended. The presence of Homo Novus receded, becoming a quiet, watchful hum in the background of the universe, a constant reminder. And across 1,000,000,000 worlds, 1,000,000,000 different species, now bound by a shared and painful grace, looked up at their skies. The Varthar shed slow, crystalline tears that refracted the light of their home star. The Grohl let out long, mournful bellows that were not cries of loss, but of understanding. Kareth stood on his balcony, his antenna drooping as he released a silent, sorrowful pheromone that smelled of gratitude. For the first time, They truly saw the stars, and they wept.